Thank you for being here. Appreciate your patience. Let's have an invocation. Dear Lord, we thank you for the opportunity to serve others as we serve you as well. And Lord, I pray that you would give us wisdom as we seek to do your will and the will of those who've sent us here in our communities and across this state. And I pray that you would help us to do what is right in your eyes. In Christ's name I pray. Amen. Amen. Well, welcome, everyone. Before we call the first bill, I want to say a few words. Y'all will recall that this House Transportation Committee passed one bill in the first 30 days. One bill out of this Transportation Committee in the first 30 days. I have asked in writing, in email, in text messages, phone calls, visits to the office, and visits on the floor of the Senate for the chairman of the committee to which that bill was signed to give us a hearing. Didn't even ask for a vote. In fact, I said, I'm not asking for a vote. Just let me have a hearing so I can get feedback from members of the Senate on our bill, and if it's not right, we'll take it up next year. We'll come back and try to do it better. But the chairman of that committee has refused to even allow a hearing in the bill. Thank you for the question. Representative Prince asked, what are we doing here? I'll tell you, I had decided over the weekend we were not going to have this hearing today. I called my wife on the way in this morning because, like many of you, I leave before my family's out of the bed, so I was calling on the way down here, and I told her my plan was to come in, gavel this meeting in, and say we're adjourned. We're not taking up any Senate bills whatsoever. That's what I was going to do. But my wife is a woman of great wisdom, and she said, you don't want to get down on their level. She said, you want to be the adult in the room. So, I'm gathered here with a few other adults in the room. We're going to take up some measures. But I just want the folks who are here to know the difference between what we do and how we operate and what's going on over there. Shameful. All right. Which senator wants to be first?
You're looking for red meat today.
Okay. Okay. Representative Nimmer suggested Chairman Tippins would be a good place to start. So, Senator Tippins, would you come on up, please? And Senator Tippins is bringing us Senate Bill 420. And I believe we have, that would be LC, let's see, the LC number is SB 420-CSFA/1. Is that what everybody has? Okay, and by the way, all of these bills have been through the subcommittee process, and some more extensively than others, and we know that some are ready for action and some are not. But on each of them, I'm going to ask the Senate subcommittee chairman, the Transportation Subcommittee chairman to give us a brief explanation of the bill and the action that took place in the subcommittee before we take action here in the full committee. Also, while I'm giving sort of preliminaries, we don't intend to take testimony today. The testimony was given on these bills in the subcommittees. There may be some exception to asking questions of members of the audience from time to time if we're taking up something that hasn't been discussed in the subcommittee. So with that, I'm going to ask Chairman Harrell to give us a brief explanation of 420, what happened in the subcommittee, and then we'll turn it over to Senator Tippins if he has anything else to add.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The subcommittee met on Senate Bill 420, which basically would require that prior to the expenditure of public funds for a fixed guideway project, that is to say a project that would have a dedicated lane without public access, would have to be approved by a referendum of the voters in said county prior to that project proceeding. And the committee considered the measure and questioned the senator about it and forwarded it to you with a do pass recommendation.
Okay. All right. Senator Tippins, did you have anything you want to add about the bill?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, sorry. Hold on one second. Let me get your mic on. There you go.
I appreciate the opportunity to come and go first. I always feel at ease with my friends.
Chairman, before you go on, would you reach, I think there's a mute button on that microphone. See if you're on there now.
Okay. The light's on anyway.
Abby, is he? Okay. Well, there you go. You're
Hey,
on.
we got it.
Thank you.
The only thing that I'd add, this is a taxpayer protection bill. This is not a situation where every project has to be approved. This is when a fixed guideway transit system is put into place. The concept has to be approved by the voters in a particular county. And the reason for that is twofold. One, these projects can go many, many years into the future. The operation of a system, they can go 50 to 75 years. And I don't know of any of them that don't require an annual subsidy from the general operating budget, and the citizens in the county need an opportunity to approve these measures before they're put into place. In line 2, the purpose of this is to require a public referendum approval prior to the expenditure of public funds for the establishment of a fixed guideway transit. If you go to line 21, the definition of a fixed guideway transit means a public transportation system, and I stress the system, not a project, using and occupying a permanent separate right-of-way for the exclusive use of public transportation, including but not limited to rails for use by trains or a bus rapid transit system. I've had questions asked of me, what about a bus system that runs on public roadways? This does not affect that whatsoever. What about the building of a lane on the interstate that's restricted to bus use at certain times of the day? That's not affected. This is for on a separate right-of-way for the exclusive use of a transit system, either on rails or a bus rapid transit system. There would be no private vehicles in this right-of-way whatsoever. I had a representative from the Georgia Highway Contractors ask me, well, what about the projects? What would keep this from the voters having to approve road projects or bridge projects? That would not affect this because that is not an exclusive right-of-way for public transportation. But I did point out, in most instances, public transportation, not public transportation, but public projects in road systems quite frequently are approved in SPLOST referendums, and the voters approve a project list. But this is not about this. This is the voter referendum prior to the inception of the system. Our local paper, the Marietta Journal, ran an editorial, their lead editorial, not yesterday, but Sunday a week ago. They had their lead editorial was about this bill. And I'll take 3 excerpts from it because I don't want to stretch this out. But the lead line says, allowing taxpayers to vote on a project in their county which they will be paying for decades into the future seems such a commonsensical position that it doesn't merit discussion. Further in the article, Senate Bill 420 lets taxpayers decide not only whether they want to be obligated for bonds it takes to fund the project, but whether they want to obligate the general fund for the annual expense it takes to operate the system. And then at the end, allowing voters to decide the way they want to spend their hard-earned money is never a wrong call. The Georgia House should approve the bill, and Governor Nathan Deal should sign it. This is a taxpayer protection bill. I'm not against transit, but I believe that those people who are supposed to pay for something ought to have an opportunity to have a say into how those funds are spent. That's what this bill's about. Thank you all so much for your consideration. Mr. Chairman, if there's any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer them.
Thank you very much. So the questions for the senator. We have a couple questions. Representative Setzler, is yours a question? Do you have a question for the senator? Okay, I'll come back to you. Is this Representative Benton? Chairman Benton? You have?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Tippins, it seems like we're always passing something in the General Assembly for the Atlanta area that may or may not come back to affect everybody else in the state. Out where I live, we'd like to get a third lane to the interstate, but will your bill in any way affect that situation, or would it have to be a lane that is only for commuters coming into Atlanta?
I don't see how it could affect that if it's on a DOT right-of-way, because this would be a separate system that has a separate right-of-way for the exclusive use of a public transit system. I don't see how it would affect if you're talking about another lane, expanding a lane on the interstate. I don't believe that's applicable at all.
But if they moved off of the DOT right-of-way, then it would affect them, right? Would that mean that we would then have to vote for it to come through Jackson County, and Barrow would then have to vote for it to come through Barrow County?
This would be for a county to establish a transit system.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Representative Gardner.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I wanted to thank the senator for adding the sections at the end that were requested by City of Atlanta and Fulton into CAB. So thank you for that.
We tried to accommodate that, and in doing that, this in no way affects MARTA, the counties that are currently in MARTA, and expansion of MARTA in those counties that have already approved it by referendum. And the MARTA law from '65 requires that any county that joins MARTA has to join through a referendum.
Absolutely.
This also absolutely excludes the Beltway project and also the streetcar project.
Streetcar. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for your help.
Any other questions, Chairman Tippins? Okay. Chairman Setzler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just going to say to Senator Tippins and to the gentleman's concern, Representative Chairman Benton's concern, isn't it true, Senator Tippins, this applies to rail projects, and to the reason it even mentions the word bus is if you have a rubber tire system that looks like a train, acts like a train, functions in a fixed guideway like a train, but it happens to be a rubber tire system, it covers that as if it were a train. It has nothing to do with buses that we understand running in lanes or hot lanes on the interstate. Isn't true?
That's correct.
And I would also say that as this was discussed, I appreciate the senator. Because MARTA requires a referendum vote to expand, this is if something were not under the MARTA Act, but were to operate in a similar way, this requires the same kind of referendum. It makes a train coming out to a metro county that's going to require that annual transit subsidy over the course of decades just requires a referendum vote as if MARTA were doing it. It's no different than that. So appreciate the senator's bill.
All right. There appearing to be no further questions. What's the pleasure of the committee?
Move to pass.
I have a motion. Is there a second? A motion by Representative Carson, a second by Representative Sims. Are there any amendments? None. All in favor of the passage of Senate Bill 420, SB 420, CSFA/1 will signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the bill moves forward. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee.
Glad to get to deal with one of the adults across the hall. All right, next up we're going to, somebody said I'm not making any friends. Well, guess what? I thought I had friends until we got to crossover day. This will be Senate Bill 307, Senator Beach. This is the bus stop advertising bill.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And we're just so we're clear, we're dealing with LC 391389S. Has everybody got that? Is that what you have, Senator Beach?
Which one is it now?
1389S.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I do want to let you know, if you would have come to the Economic Development Committee, you would have gotten a hearing.
I'm sure that if I'd gone to any number of other committees, I'd have been okay.
And you would have gotten a vote. So,
thank you very much.
Thank you.
And let me, this one's in a bit of a different posture, and I'll go ahead and tell everybody where we are on this. The subcommittee recommended do pass, and I'm going to let the subcommittee chairman speak in just a minute about the process. Well, actually, let me let him go first. This was in Representative Watson's subcommittee. Representative Watson, where are you? Oh, there. Are you 15? All right. Give us the report on what the subcommittee did.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think you touched on most of it, but this was a good bill. It's going to allow some of our local governments to bring in some extra revenue, and the committee didn't see any trouble with this bill, and it passed unanimously.
Thank you. And I have talked to Senator Beach about the committee substitute. If you look beginning on line 52, there's a section 2, and that is down through line 117. That is the single bill that this committee passed during the session before crossover day, and we've just amended it to Senate Bill 307 with the author's consent. Again, another one of the adults across the hall. Thank you very much.
No problem.
All right. So are there any questions about Senate Bill 307, about the original bill or the language of the committee sub from any members? Representative Defball.
Thank you. Senator, the only question I have, and maybe I just haven't read it all through, what size signs are these going to be? Can they be bigger than the bus stop, or can they be
No, they're going to be the same size as the posters that are already there. It's
Okay.
just going to go from a poster to digital advertising, so the slats can change and kind of get us into the 21st century. But it still has to follow all the same regulations of the billboard industry, the brightness, the control brightness. The panels have to stay for 10 seconds before they can switch, and no obscenity. So it's
Okay.
it's pretty tight language,
Thank
but
you.
it's the same size. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative, is that Harold? Who's 25?
25.
Representative Nimmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Beach, I just want to make sure we were discussing right here the digital, moving to the 21st century, as you mentioned it, going digital instead of the poster board or cardboard, paper, whatever. This isn't some backdoor attack on the timber industry, is it?
No.
I just
not.
want to make sure. Well, you got to look after the timber people.
I love the timber industry.
I think Representative Williams down here was maybe suggesting an amendment to require those slats to be wooden slats. I don't know that. I didn't recognize him for that purpose, though. So. Any other questions? What is the pleasure of the committee?
Move to pass.
Okay, I heard a move to pass from Mr. Carson, and second from Mr. Setzler. Are there any amendments? All in favor of the bill, Senate Bill 307 LC 39 1389S will signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed say no. The bill passes, and that one will move forward. Senator, we're going to come back to your other bill in just a few minutes.
Okay.
Next will be Senate Bill 383.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'm not sure there are more than 3 grown-ups in the Senate, but we got all 3 of them here today.
Thank you,
So.
Mr. Chairman. And you know, if you come over to natural resources, you're going to hear it.
All right. This one was, I believe this was Chairman Benton. Was this? Oh, Chairman McCall. Thank you. Chairman McCall, can you give us a brief update on Senate Bill 383?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. We had a little meeting, and after more than one testimony and more than one question and more than one argument over how to do it, we changed a few things. And then today, when I was coming in by Mayfield Dairy, I was looking hard as I could look, and I caught a glimpse of a Holstein cow looking down over the top of a tree, but it was for just a split second, which is what the topic of this bill is about. So with that in mind, at the proper time, after Senator Ginn gets through talking whatever he's going to talk, I got a little amendment.
Okay. All right. Say that again.
I said we did pass it out to bid committee.
Okay, and there was a recommendation do pass? Okay. All right. So again, do you have a substitute you want the committee to consider?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
What's that LC number?
LC 401190ERS.
Okay. Why don't you talk to us about the sub, if you want to, or do you have somebody else you?
I'd love to talk to you about it.
Okay.
You have just a second. I've invited the mayor of Brazelton, and that's the town of Brazelton, and their town manager to be with me. I have Mayor Bill Orr and town manager Jennifer Dees.
Thank you for being here today.
Well, I would like to have them address you as well. But, you know, after an extensive dialogue and discussion on this legislation, I listened to what everybody said, and I think that with a lot of suggestions from the committee or subcommittee, I'd like to narrow the scope of the legislation. And I want to try to make sure that we stay within the existing sign code, so that there's no questions about, you know, the highway beautification fees that are paid. What I have in this substitution is simply we want to narrow this to where only the agritourism industry would be affected, so that you think, and I'll, you know, try not to do anything that's a constitutional violation or something that doesn't bring it appropriate, but in this case, Mayfield Dairy was my target. They've got several hundred employees there. It's a great tourism mecca for our region. But what I've got, if you look to the on the section 2, we're narrowing this to simply agritourism-based industries, agriculture-based industries. I know that Chairman Smith had came to speak about the bill, was concerned about, you know, it affecting a lot of different things across the state. So we've narrowed and tightened that scope. And because I don't want to have, you know, we've been working on this for several years with Mayfield. And so on lines in section 1, on lines 21 through 25, we're just trying to speed up the process for them by eliminating a 5-year waiting period. And I'll be glad to answer questions. I've got numerous substitutes here on my desk that we've looked at, but I think that if y'all all have a copy of the substitute, I'll be glad to answer questions at this time. And
do all the members of the committee have LC 401190 ERS? Mm-hmm. Is there anyone who does not have it? Okay, everybody's got it. Are there any questions for the author or any discussion on? Let me before we go into questions, Chairman Gann, are you supporting the committee substitute and the committee adopting the committee substitute you just described?
Yes, sir. I think it accomplishes the original goal I set out to do, and addresses the concerns that were brought up in our subcommittee meeting, and I hope that I can get favorable consideration from the committee.
Okay. Let me start with Chairman McCall, since this came out of his subcommittee.
All I was wanting to say was that since I deal with agriculture a little bit, and since agritourism is one of the fastest growing sectors and the largest industry in the state, I was ready to make a motion to pass.
I'll come back and recognize you for that in a moment. Representative Gardner.
Well, I've learned a little bit about this bill over the last couple of days, and wondered, so this only applies to local agritourism facilities, and it would not allow any other tree trimming?
Only for the agritourism industry. We actually have that spelled out in state code and state law. And what we're trying to do here is limit the scope of this legislation.
I appreciate that.
To very narrowly define it. I know there was a lot of concern about that, so I said, okay, let me try to work within what the feedback I had from our subcommittee meeting, and if you and I'll be glad to read it through if you don't have a copy.
I have a copy.
I know you can read better than I can.
No, probably not, but I'm just trying to think of the implications of this to the garden ladies.
Well,
Garden
and I
club
think
ladies.
they like agriculture as well because we grow trees.
Let
Well,
me.
not only that, but the agritourism is not going to cut down a lot of trees, right?
That's correct.
Thank
Representative
you.
Gardner, let me go on and take some other questions,
Okay.
and if you have questions, I'll come back to you if that's all right. All right. Chairman Benton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, again, you and I have about the same number of times to ride by that area every week. I paid close attention Friday when I went home. I knew the sign was there, and I couldn't see it.
Oh.
And so
I know you were going north because
yeah.
you can't see it at all.
Yeah. So I feel like this is a good compromise, and Mr. Chairman, I'd like to second Chairman McCall's motion
Okay.
when he makes it.
All right. Chairman Setzler. Oh, I turned off your button. Hold on. Push your button again there. There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the author, at the risk of being the skunk at the party, I just want to ask the question. The last family trip we took to a tourist spot was to Mayfield Dairy. So I love it. I do. I'm just asking the question: if someone's got a water park or if some other equally meaningful tourist destination. I mean, we could pontificate about this all day. Does this hold up in court, though? I mean, is this something where we can single out this industry gets special treatment for cutting back trees to signs when someone else can make? I mean, is this? I mean, if this committee were in a place where we believe that it shouldn't apply generally, shouldn't apply to any business, or shouldn't apply to any tourist business, but only applies to this one, and the courts find that you can't treat agritourism any different than you can a water park, any different than you can a ballpark, any different than you can something else. Are we opening this up to apply to everybody? And I think the committee's got to be satisfied that if the courts read this and say this is a unfair treatment to one industry, I think we've got to be comfortable this could be opened up to apply to everybody. I mean, I just asked the gentleman. I've got 3 gallons of Mayfield milk in my refrigerator right now, and I'd love to help them. I just don't know that this is something. I'm just asking the author, the chairman, members of the committee, is this something we can do for just agritourism that can't apply equally to everybody?
I'll ask counsel to answer that question for us. Do you think we got a constitutional problem here?
The current billboard law has been challenged many times as being unconstitutional. There is a statement in that talks about the public purpose versus the takings of state property. That language is missing here. So it would be up to the courts at that point to determine if it's a taking.
So help me out with that. There's some language that we could include that would make the bill safer constitutionally. Is that what you're saying?
The current billboard language has intent of the General Assembly, why they passed it, a public purpose versus the taking of state property, the weighing of it. That language is missing here, but
Is this 32 is Title 32, Chapter 6, Article 3, Part 2? Is that the billboard statute language? Is that the billboard code language?
yes.
Okay, so we'd be adding to that existing code section there, correct?
And I believe that language is already in that code section. So
Okay.
we're not taking that language out. We're not striking that language.
So if this language was standalone, not part of that article, we might have a problem there. But I think it sounds to me like we're probably okay on a constitutional basis there. I don't think there's any protected. I don't think we're going to get into protected class arguments with regard to agritourism facilities being given a special designation. Do you think, counsel?
Well, it's just that the intent, I guess you'd have to look at the intent that's defined in 75.3. I can read it to you. General Assembly finds and declares that outdoor advertising provides a substantial service and benefit to Georgia and Georgia citizens as well as the traveling public. Therefore, the General Assembly declares it to be in the public interest that provisions be made for the visibility of outdoor advertising sign legally erected and maintained along the highways of the state to provide information regarding places offering lodging, food, motor vehicles and lubricants, motor service and repairs, and any other services or products available to the general public. Recognizing, however, that the beautification of the state and the health of its environment are absolutely essential and equally as important to the traveling public, the General Assembly defines that these needs must be balanced.
Okay, and so we're invited through that language to determine whether or not this proposed code section strikes that balance. In the view of the chairman, it does. I think that we would have to we'd have to have the 7 justices of the Supreme Court to come in and tell us any differently, and unfortunately they don't come over and make house calls like this. Certainly members of the committee and of the full body will have an opportunity through the Rules Committee process or through potentially floor amendments or other efforts to try to either change or defeat the bill. I'm going to take note of your concern. And did you have another comment?
And I was just going to say, Mr. Chairman, if I'm a proprietor in another, another tourist venue of the same scope and size, as soon as this passes, if I'm having tree issues with my signs, then I'm going to file a court case against this because I think on its face you can make a real claim to that effect. I don't know where the court's going to land. I do think our committee members need to be comfortable that if we do this, you got to be comfortable with this being broader than agritourism. I'm certainly no learned attorney. It seems to be a open question.
Okay. Well, I'm utterly satisfied. See what I did there? Representative Prince.
Yes, Senator. I see where it's basically forming a council as well, beautification council. Is there a fiscal note? I mean, is this going to cost us anything to form this council, or is it already there?
They're already there. They're already in place.
So there's just extra duties for those guys.
Matter of fact, when we changed the title dealing with permitted signs that year, I want to say it generated $2 or $3 million for highway beautification, and so they're already in place. Matter of fact, those funds have been depleted down to less than $100,000 now, and this would be a good way to. The money that's used or that's paid in for a permitting fee to allow for the vegetation removal goes to highway beautification, and that the process is in place. Everything's taken care of, so that this just would simply add more funds for that program. And I might, if I could, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
Said the under Title 50, Chapter 7, Article 70. We spell out agritourism, said in the state law. And one of the things that probably many of y'all, and I know Representative Setzer said you've seen a sign that says agritourism spot. So we already do some things for our number one industry in the state to promote agritourism and promote our number one industry that we don't do for all other industries. So I'm just to help alleviate some of those fears.
Okay. Representative Williams.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. While the chair has already ruled, and I certainly comply with my chairman, I want to stay on the committee. But, Senator, in your opinion, should my good friend, Representative Seltzer, find a new brand of milk? He's got 3 gallons.
We kind of like to have Mayfield.
All right. Let's see, who's Representative Nimmer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator of the 47th, I'm convinced that this bill is not a backdoor attempt to demise or diminish or tear down the timber industry. However, I do have a question due to the chairman of this committee alluding to you being one of the adults across the hall. The House has a great bill in your committee that my seatmate, Representative Debbie Buckner, is very fond of, the Riverine Sportfish bill. The Shoal Bass bill's got an amendment on it that she's very anxious to see it come back. And, Mr. Chairman, if it's appropriate to just encourage the Senator of the 47th as he goes back and journeys into his committee room that maybe we could see that bill come out.
You know, Chairman Emmer, I'm all with you. Said that bill is on the agenda for tomorrow, said at our Natural Resources and Environment Committee. And
excellent.
We're looking forward to getting that bill passed into legislation.
Thank you, my friend.
Anybody else got any bills they want to ask about? Floor is open. All right. Are there any other questions for Chairman Ginn? Any other questions? All right. Well, I'm going to recognize Chairman McCall for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, we were just discussing if Senator Ginn had a hush 30 minutes ago, we'd be done with his bill. If it would help Chairman Benton's politics, I don't care if he makes a motion since it's in his district.
Chairman Benton, you want to make a motion?
I'd be glad to move to pass.
All right. That's a move do pass LC 40-1190 ERS. The committee substitute SB 383. Is there a second from Chairman McCall? Yep. Is there any? Are there any amendments? All right. All in favor of the passage of the bill signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed say no. The bill passes. Moves forward to the Rules Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Who is going to be your sponsor on this bill?
I was asking Chairman McCall if he would carry the bill, please.
But he hasn't agreed yet.
Well, it's really difficult, but I'm going to weigh in on him.
Okay. All right. We'll put Chairman McCall on there. And Chairman Setzler, are you the sponsor for Senator Tippin's bill? Okay. All right. All right. Thank you very much, Senator Ginn. And I'm going to ask Senator Beach to come on back up now. And before we take up 346, let me ask you on 307, who will be your House sponsor on that bill? If you don't have one, I'll be glad to do it.
Would you?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'll do that. Okay. Give me just a moment. Which version of 346 are we taking up? Okay. All right. This will be on Senate Bill 346, which also came up through Representative Watson's subcommittee. And I'm going to let him, and I will just say before he starts, this bill has had somewhat of a tortured process. So I will not blame anybody for getting confused with the explanation of this. And I'll turn over to Representative Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We actually had two meetings on this bill because we had so much testimony. So we did have a lot of concerns that we needed to address, and we have addressed them up until the final minutes of this meeting. But all in all, this was a pretty good bill, just trying with coming off the heels of HB 170 and with what the state's doing with that revenue, and just trying to be more efficient and get projects done faster. The senator brought this bill forward to try to do some of that, and I think we've worked through a lot of the problems that we have with the bill. And basically, in a nutshell, any projects under $100 million by any local governments of the states will be able to move forward in a more expedited fashion, dealing with the Environmental Policy Act, and still put forth the effort that they need to make sure that we don't violate any of our environmental or historical issues. And that's the biggest concern, is we want to speed up the process and save taxpayers money, but we also want to make sure that we do it right. And so I think we've come to that in this bill now. So it came to this committee, and look forward to the discussion and appreciate the senator bringing it forward.
And what was the recommendation of the committee on the?
Sorry, it was do pass, but we do have an amendment, I think, that's going to be offered to get everybody together.
Okay, and the members will see in their packet LC 391409 ERS. Is that the version we're going to be asked to take up today, Representative Watson?
LC 391409 ERS.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Just want to make sure we're on the same page. Okay. Are there Are there questions for the senator or for the subcommittee chairman, or any other questions about the bill, comments about the bill? All right. Representative Nimmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This, in subcommittee, I asked Representative Gardner if she would allow me to offer this up during your full committee right here. I made the motion do pass unamended out of subcommittee to full, with the understanding that we would take up Representative Gardner's ringtone and just make sure everybody's listening, that we would take up Representative Gardner's amendment. Representative Williams and I discussed it. Representative Gardner's happy with it. Senator Beach is fine with the amendment. He is. There's a copy laying on everybody's desk again, as we had last week. And Mr. Chairman, at the appropriate time, being that I made the motion to not accept the amendment in subcommittee, I would like to make the motion at the appropriate time to for a do pass recommendation as amended to the substitute to 346.
So are you, well, I haven't recognized him for a motion. He's told me he wants to make a motion at the right moment. But are you referring to LC 391408S? Am I looking at I'm looking at the wrong. Okay, all right. So you're speaking to the substitute that Representative Watson just told us about.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That is correct. And,
okay.
And we've got a copy of that amendment laying in front of everyone. We do not have a bill drafted with that amendment in it.
It's in the packet.
I'm
sorry. In the folder. That's the LC 391409 ERS is the same. I believe that's the same. Is that the same language, Sam? Representative Watson?
No.
No, I don't think so.
Oh, it's not.
Mr.
No,
Chairman, this is the amendment that GDOT is in favor of.
Okay. Well.
And I've got GDOT representatives here to speak in favor of it.
Well, let's
answer any questions.
Let's hold on just a second. All right. So we have an unnumbered substitute on the floor, on the table before us, and in addition to which we have 391409. I'm going to call this the Gardner amendment, just for ease of consideration.
I'm not seeing any difference in this.
We got copies coming to you. We have extra copies here. This is the one, if you look at the top of the page, it says suggested amendment for SB 346, and then it has a date 3/14/16 and begins with open parentheses 12-16-9 period.
It's the same thing.
It is. You were correct, Mr. Chairman.
Let's see. We'll just hold on one second, everybody. Hold on one second. Representative Gardner, tell me where it's different than in what's in 1409.
I think it's insignificant, but it says consistent with paragraph 3 of code section, and the other one says consistent with 1216(2) with the 3 in
Okay, so it's just the difference being a drafting preference,
right?
And I would defer to the LC version, which was drafted by council. Are there any other distinctions that you see, Representative Gardner or Representative Nimmer?
No, they appear it appears to be the amendment we talked about the other day.
Okay, so the amendment that's been presented by Representative Gardner and discussed by Representative Nimmer, and which was presented by the committee to the subcommittee, we have the same language in substance in LC 391409 ERS. Do you agree with that, Representative Gardner?
I'm not a lawyer, sir. I would defer to you on that.
Do you agree also, Representative Nimmer?
Yes, sir. The only actual word I see different is on line 12, after the comma near the end on the actual bill itself says such project shall not. In the handout it says such project does not, but we're working off of the LC version, if I'm correct here. I apologize for creating confusion on the handout. But
Okay, no, that's no problem. And this, as I said, this bill's gone through kind of a tortured process, and that's okay because we want to torture the devil out of it and get it right because the devil's in the details. All right, so with those comments, I still have a couple of questions, so let me get to those questions. Representative Williams, is that you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a statement more than a question. Let me thank the Senator for the bill and most certainly the amendment that has brought about agreement here, which I think is amenable to everybody. The one thing that I wanted to comment on is I think that it is a time-honored tradition that I think is great. And I saw Chairman McCall defer to Representative Benton because it was in his district, and that's a courtesy. And I just wanted to say and thank Representative Nimmer for discussing this bill with me. It's just a courtesy that I have the largest amount of sites of anybody in this state. And it is a courtesy to run things by when they're being done. I got 2,000 sites and is ranking Democrat on this committee. And I just wanted to put that in for the record.
Thank you.
All right. Representative Williams, thank you very much. And there is, to get back to the discussion of the distinctions, I do see one, Representative Gardner has pointed out one distinction that is maybe significant here on line 14. Let's see. No. Representative Gardner, hold on one second, folks. You're looking at the line above. It is actually. Nope. We can turn off the panic button. We just saw the absence of a not in one line, but no big deal. But the not is there, so we're okay. All right, Representative Setzler, would you push your button again? I keep trying to keep you from talking. I'm sorry. Do it again there. It keeps turning off every time I touch the button. It must be a sign. But you're not going to take that sign, are you?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, it's I wanted to ask the author. I mean, this is pretty big policy. And I'd like to get into the if I could indulge the committee, I'd like to get into what we're doing here. I mean, because $100 million road project is a big project. I mean, we've got there are projects with 6-7 mile alignments that are $50 million in cost. So this could be a 10-mile project. It could be a big interchange. I mean, what's in play here is the environmental assessment piece, the cultural resources piece, where we unearth old, could be buried things from Indian mounds to Civil War entrenchment, trenches to foundations of old. I want to understand what we're really doing here. I wasn't in subcommittee, so forgive me for that, but I do want to understand the specifics because this is pretty big policy here.
Well, it is big policy, but it's good policy in such that we have been very dependent, as you know, on federal dollars. We don't do many JEPA projects where you use the JEPA process because we've been so heavily dependent on federal dollars, and we've had to do the NEPA process and so on. Mm-hmm. But when we did pass House Bill 170, we've got $1 billion of state funding. So all I was trying to do here is to eliminate some paperwork, not to hurt the tree industry, but I was trying to, we're still going to have to do the Georgia Wildflower Preservation Act, the Georgia Endangered Wildlife Act, the Georgia Erosion and Sediment Act, the Clean Water Act, the Georgia Abandoned Cemetery and Burial Act, the Endangered Species Act of 1973, and then this amendment with the cultural and historical sites. So we're still doing the same process, Representative Setzler, but then what happens in the current form, after you do these assessments, then you have to hire a consultant to put the reports together that can take 45 days to 60 days. Then it has to be sent to EPD and reviewed. Then it has to be approved, sent back to the department, and then they can put a shovel in the dirt. That can take anywhere from 6 to 8 months. What we're trying to do is cut that 6 to 8 months out of paperwork. if they go through this process and they know the Clean Water Act's clear, the Erosion Sediment Act is clean, then they can go forward and put a shovel in the dirt, and we can get our taxpayers seeing some benefit of that $1 billion of state money, not federal money.
No, I totally get it. I get the maddening nature of NEPA and some of those things. However, I don't. I mean, we've got to delve into the specifics of exactly what this is doing. And a $100 million project can impact a site or can have an environmental impact just like a $10 million project can. I mean, I don't understand the cost threshold as exempting a whole class of studies. If you've got you could have a half-mile bypass that could have the same impact that a 10-mile road could have. It just all has to do with where it's going, what wetland impact it's having, and so forth. I just don't understand the $100 million threshold as a hard cut versus, for example, when you do NEPA work under the National Environmental Protection Act, for small sites, there's an accelerated NEPA process that can be done much more quickly, and it streamlines the process. I guess I'm wondering out loud why we couldn't have a streamlined process that has shot clocks on it, time certain, as opposed to eliminating a whole series of investigations which are meaningful, the state believes is meaningful, just because it's under a very large project threshold.
Yeah, but Representative, the investigation does happen because you have to go through all these steps of these processes, these different Clean Water Act and so on. You're just not doing the paperwork if it comes back clean. You're not having to wait to have somebody, it's shuffled from desk to desk to desk to desk to send it back to GDOT to put a shovel in the dirt.
I guess I'm just trying to understand how this bill does that. I mean, I think this is big policy, and where does it say you've got to do a cultural resources assessment, but the cultural resources report can be an executive summary instead of a binder? Where does it say you got to do the environmental assessment, and the environmental assessment can be an executive summary, not a binder? I don't see that in here. No, there may be terms of art that apply to this that I don't understand, but I just don't understand how we're eliminating an enormous percentage of our projects, calling it streamlined. I know the inspiration's right, but I want to make sure the specifics work, and I'm just not been persuaded.
Let me jump in. I know that GDOT has had some involvement with this process and trying to help us get to the right language. I'm going to recognize Josh Waller. If you'll come over to the podium and help us with Chairman Setzler's questions.
To expand on the comments the Senator made, GEPA itself, much like NEPA, is sort of an overlay law that basically has you document all the different impacts. Those impacts tie back to other statutes. So whether it's soil Erosion Control and Sedimentation Act, Clean Water, Endangered Species, those are actually the controlling laws. The one area where there was a deficiency that was identified in the subcommittee dealt with the historical and cultural resources portion. There's not an analogous statute that specifically ties back, and I believe that's why the substitute amendment calls out and pulls those out, since they don't have an analogous law that ties back to the process and calls them out specifically.
So what you're saying is this has no impact on the cultural resources evaluation component of
it still requires evaluation. In fact, if the substitute in front of you ties back to the very beginning of the statute where it says that those type of evaluations are supposed to be part of the decision-making process. So I think the discussion here today was actually at the last subcommittee meeting, there was a meeting between GDOT and DNR talking about the path forward if the bill, and actually in its original form passed, how do we create the process? And so what this does, what a lot of people heard from the committee and said, look, we may trust the department, but you can't always know what does it look like down the line. We'd like to see something in statute to clearly say that there will be a process to do these evaluations. And I believe that's what the subcommittee does, the substitute amendment does. Since those other portions of GEPA are already covered by another statute, it calls out specifically the historical and cultural resources.
So these code section references, I want to be clear, the effect of the substitute bill would have no impact on the cultural resources assessment process as it exists today under GEPA. Is that correct?
The only challenge I would have with that is that we actually haven't done a lot of GEPA projects. So in terms of the process, we don't have a laundry list that we can say this is how we would have done it versus now. The anticipation is it would be the same to ensure no matter what the law is, the department's interest is in protecting our cultural resources, because if we do something the wrong way, we'll just be back here in this committee watching the law be changed back to restrict the department's ability to deliver roads and bridges.
But the wrong way is determined by what's in statute. That's what you're executing. My question is, what is the impact on the requirements to do a cultural resources analysis? And what I mean by that is, if you're paving a road through what's been identified as Indian mounds, you're paving a road through what may be around settlements. I mean, I've got friends of mine in my firm. We don't do any of this stuff, but I know people in previous life have gone and done very detailed documentation for the National Park Service and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and so forth. It's a very detailed process to make sure you're not paving through an old, grain mill or something like that that's got. So are you telling me that this, without being able to read the code references, I don't know what I'm voting on, Mr. Chairman? And does this have? Does the substitute ensure there are no changes as required by law for cultural resources analysis?
The only thing that I could probably say to this is that there are probably things that would be different under JEPA than NEPA. This bill notwithstanding, JEPA has a much more streamlined process. So if a lot of the individuals you're referencing deal with NEPA and are doing a lot with NEPA, there are going to be different guidelines that aren't going to apply under JEPA. The JEPA statute itself places a lot of deference on the agency that's enacting the governmental activity and places a lot of emphasis on that agency head's discretion. So you're already empowering the agency to make certain decisions that under federal law may not be with as great a discretion. So it would be sort of apples and oranges to compare the NEPA process to what the JEPA process would be, and the underlying bill seeks to streamline the JEPA process further in terms of this sort of catch-all overall document, because you have all these other statutes in place to ensure that those resources are protected. And again, that's why the substitute adds the cultural and historical resources, because there's not a law that specifically ties back to those.
So you're saying the substitute specifies there shall be a cultural resources assessment?
Correct. That's what it states verbatim.
Okay.
All right. Recognize Representative Darlene Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is very similar. I need verification. We just so happen to recently have an archaeological dig in Thomasville. We have a Civil War prisoner of war camp, and there were some roads that may have been covered over it, and they're discovering things. And we would never, I don't want to say never, but it's not likely for us to have a $100 million project in our community. I'm sure it can happen, but again, I want to make sure that they would be protected and they would not go building a road over it.
As I understand, that is the intent of the substitute, and that would be the intent of the department, even if that substitute didn't exist.
Okay, thank you.
In fact, our division has received awards for some of the activities we've taken to preserve our cultural and historical heritage. We take great pride in that.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A lot has been said, but and I realize that in subcommittee, some of these questions did come up, and several archaeologists testified, and that is the reason that I find no problem with the bill because of the amendment, because many of these questions were concerns of our community that takes care of our archaeological digs, and if they were satisfied, I think we've reached the level of satisfaction, and like I said, with the highest amount of anybody in my state, in this state, I'm comfortable with it. But my question also is, outside of Atlanta and some of the majors, how many $100 million contracts do you anticipate? Because if you got many, I got to get in line in a hurry. I want to know now.
I would encourage you to go to garoads.org, where we have the 10-year projects laid out. I don't know. I mean, a $100 million project can be a large project, but you could have a major resurfacing project on an interstate that could come to $100 million. So.
But then that's already, the archaeological digs have been done. You're doing an interstate. I don't think there are going to be many new interstates, are there?
Not as of today,
except
just the expansion of the managed lane system in the metropolitan area.
I meant outside. Thank you.
Representative Waits.
Mr. Chairman, I just simply wanted to express my support for Representative Gardner's amendment. At the I-75 corridor in Cleveland Avenue in my district, there's a slave grave there, and so this would have been addressed had this been in place, so I'm very appreciative of the amendment.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions for the department from any members? If not, I'm going to ask Mr. Waller if you will step aside for a moment, and we'll ask Jim Langford, who testified at the subcommittee. Dr. Langford, if you would just kind of explain who you are, your credentials a little bit, and then give us your thoughts on, let me ask you first, have you seen LC 391409 ERS?
I have, just before this meeting started, yes.
Okay, let me ask you to tell us who you are, and then we'll hear your comments.
Sure. I'm Jim Langford. I'm from Calhoun, Georgia. Those of you know where that is. Grew up as an archaeologist at a very young age. I've taught probably for the past 30 years, 40 years, teaching respect for archaeological sites, and particularly Native American sites, but all kinds of sites, and trying to preserve those kinds of sites. I run something called the Kusawati Foundation, and that's what we do, is we preserve archaeological sites, bring in universities for research, and we educate the public, children and adults, in appreciating these projects and these kinds of things and trying to save those. I was on the DNR board at one time, particularly when we were trying to save the Resaca battlefield up in Gordon County, and we did. So I've seen lots of different things over the years. I've seen archaeology before JEPA went into effect, and let me tell you, it was a mess. And now a lot of great things have happened at DOT over those years, sensitivity on these things, but JEPA has helped a lot. The other thing that's interesting is JEPA is the only legislation that we have in Georgia that protects archaeological resources. Now, we've got some burial laws. I wrote those in 1991, 92. That's great. That's only when you encounter burials. It doesn't say Civil War sites or slave cabins or other kinds of things like that. JEPA is the only thing that we've got, and it's not very strong. It's pretty darn weak, but it's all we got. All those other things, wildflowers, sedimentation and erosion, all those wonderful things, we've got great laws that protect those environmental things where they need to be. But this is all that Cultural Resources has. So we came to the table, very concerned about this bill. We proposed some amendment language. We've been back and forth. I think this language is okay. I think it works. We've hammered away at it. We've got lots of folks here. We'll save you from all of them talking today, but really smart people who work in this profession daily. Some of them, Sarah Gale, who worked at DOT as an archaeologist too, she's helped us through this process as well. So I feel good about the process that you all have gone through. I feel good about the discussion, very good detailed discussion, very good sensitivity to these issues. Wish we had stronger environmental laws, wish we had stronger cultural resource laws. We don't. That's another day, and hopefully we'll get to those at some point. But thank you, Chairman Coomer. We appreciate your help.
All right. So as I understand, what you're saying is you're okay with LC 391409 ERS from your perspective as an archaeologist, a professional working in the field?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Before you sit down, Chairman McCall.
I just want to move the previous question.
All right. I recognize you for that purpose. And well, actually, there's not really a question to be moved yet, but this is what I'll do. I'll recognize you for a motion on LC 391409 ERS. Is that your motion?
Move to pass.
All right. And there's a second by Representative Gardner. Is there any discussion on LC 391409 ERS? And I want to be clear to everyone. I want to, if there is any discussion, now's the time to have it. And there was some discussion and some notes being passed back and forth about the different versions of this bill. So if there's any discussion to be had, now's the time to have it. Are there any questions or any discussion? All right. I recognize Representative Carson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to be sure we're working off of 1409 ERS and we're not amending. We're voting on this substitute, correct?
Well, that's what we're discussing, and if there are amendments, now would be the time for anybody to offer an amendment.
Understand.
Any other discussion of this bill? We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All right. All in favor of the passage of LC 391409 ERS to the Rules Committee will signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed say no. And the ayes have it. Very good work. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And who is your House sponsor on this bill?
Gary.
Representative Watson. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Watson.
Okay. we have if you folks will give me just one moment. Okay. Chairman Setzler, why don't you go ahead and bring your things around. The last bill on the agenda is Senate Bill 366. Senate Bill 366. And this is a bill that likewise has had a very interesting, deliberative, thoughtful process in this House committee. And I want to, and Representative Setzler, Chairman Setzler has asked, when we were talking about bringing this bill forward, he had asked to make a presentation to the committee, and he brought some visual aids with him to discuss this bill. I just wanted the committee to see what I'm about to spare you from. We have had a lot of discussion on this issue, and there are some very strong opinions on both sides of the issue presented in the bill. And certainly every member of this committee is interested in controlling costs and preserving quality in all processes of government contracting, especially at the department that we oversee, the Georgia Department of Transportation. And it's very important for us to make sure that we get it right when dealing with broad sweeping policies that affect the day-to-day operations of an agency that manages over $3 billion a year in taxpayer funds. To that end, and to the great credit of Senator Gooch, who I will tell you is another one of the grown-ups over there, who has worked, there's no secret that the process was pretty straightforward and simple in the Senate. And we all know what that process looked like. But that is not the process this committee operates under. We are going to give a deliberative process to every bill that comes before us and make sure that we get it right. To that end, Senator Gooch, who cares deeply about the taxpayers of this state and cares very much for the institutions we represent here, has asked that his bill be addressed, or the concepts of his bill be addressed through a committee process through the summer months while we're in between session. And I commend him for that, and I think it is an excellent act of statesmanship, because we all get very emotionally wound up in our own bills, and we want our bills to pass because we all believe that if it wasn't a great bill, we wouldn't have started out with it. And so I really commend him for his responsibility on this bill and taking a very difficult choice and making it, I think it is the right choice for this committee and for the state. So you'll be getting information in the next few days or weeks about a process to study the concepts of the bill attempted to address, but we will not be taking up the bill today, and so there will be no discussion of that bill in the committee today. We're adjourned.